So as we move forward in our work together, I'm going to give you a spectrum of possible symptoms and signs that occur with sexual trauma and sexual abuse. These symptoms don't mean that you have been abused or have had sexual trauma. Many of these symptoms can come from other sources. And you'll find as we go along that it's not always the most important thing to know where the trauma came from, but to be able to work with the effects that it's left on our bodies, on our minds, our psyches, and our spirits. Quite frequently, people who have experienced sexual trauma often have physical symptoms, physical illnesses that don't seem to be able to be diagnosed, that they're not due to any organic cause like a virus or something wrong with the organ system. And these kinds of physical symptoms are sometimes called somatization. Basically, the experience of the trauma is playing out in the theater of the body. Another common symptom of sexual trauma and trauma in general is an impairment in what's called affect regulation. It means, in other words, either that we're overwhelmed by feelings, that we feel flooded by feelings, or that we feel numb and shut down, or said another way, we don't have feelings. We go through life more like robots without feeling. And often these will change back and forth with one person at different times. The symptoms can play out in the arena of relationships. For example, most people who are traumatized, I would say all people to some degree, have distorted relations with other people. And sometimes it's in one particular area, other times it's just almost blanket. And if we've had sexual trauma, almost certainly we'll have a distortion in our physical sexual relationships. And it's possible to have distortion in those relationships with other kinds of trauma as well. Other symptoms of chronic abuse and chronic trauma are abuse of drugs and alcohol, nicotine. These are all drugs. And overwork. Often men have symptoms which are more related to overwork and drinking and sometimes to violence, whereas women more frequently have symptoms related to emotion. Although, of course, either can have either as well. It's just a tendency. Eating disorders frequently are associated with histories of sexual abuse. And again, please, I don't want people to make the mistake of thinking because they have an eating disorder that means that they've been sexually abused or sexually traumatized. That can be both incorrect and harmful. Self-mutilation is a symptom that, again, is associated with usually severe trauma and abuse, where people will injure themselves or cut themselves. There can be more general feelings or more general signs or symptoms like loss of a sustaining belief. It can be a spiritual belief, a belief in goodness of people, a religious belief. The person doesn't have something that helps them move through life the way other people do. And two symptoms that are also very strongly characteristic of sexual trauma and trauma in general are amnesia and dissociation. Now, amnesia can be an inability to remember a specific particular traumatic event. But it can also be a blanking out of a whole part of one's life. So sometimes traumatized people are not able to remember anything under the age of 5 or 6 or even under the age of 10. It's as though that part of their life never existed. And amnesia can also be of a tendency that people have to just not remember things in the present. That also can be a form of amnesia. And dissociation is a common symptom, and we think of that as when the person is not in their body, when they go outside of their body. And that is an important form of dissociation. Frequently, a person will actually experience themselves severing from their body, and it's as though they're floating out above their body and looking down at the accident or at the surgery or at the child being molested. And they may feel sorry for the child, or it may be a neutral perception, but it doesn't seem like it's them. So there's a disconnection there. Again, these kinds of things like dissociation, it's what allows us to survive what would be unbearable. It makes it bearable because we're not really there feeling it. And that's meant to be a temporary thing. And in traumatic symptoms, it's become a preferred mode, a chronic thing that we do. So we dissociate, and we should then reassociate. That would be the healthy thing. But what happens is we don't know how to get back, and we remain disconnected. And that can give rise to feelings of unreality, of feeling depersonalized, not like a real person, or like being in a dream. And dissociation can also be more subtle. So we can remember part of experience, but little pieces of that experience may be blanked. Or dissociation can be a disconnection between different parts of the body, so that our arms and our legs don't feel like they're connected together. When we walk, we don't feel a sense of rhythm. It's disjointed and disconnected. That's a bodily manifestation of dissociation. Sometimes a whole part of our body feels blank, so that we can't really feel anything in our gut. And sometimes people purge so they can get some feeling in their gut. And feelings of helplessness, hopelessness are quite common. And this is because we were at one time helpless. And we may experience what's called hypervigilance. In other words, we're always on the alert. And a lot of times people can't sleep because of that, because they're always on the alert. Well, look, if you're in a situation where there could be danger or threat, you want to be alert. You want to be hypervigilant. But you want that to tune down when the actual threat passes. So taking these as a whole, knowing that we may be experiencing one kind of symptom at one time, another kind at another, but more importantly, that in any symptom we have is already the seed of a healing process.